Going into the MEAC season finale, there was only one scenario that ended with North Carolina Central being the second seed in the tournament, and the Eagles got it. Oh, yeah, it's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make it Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. Just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. And are you one of those drivers who wants to push everything farther? Ever wonder what adventure is around the corner for you? Well, take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. We wrap up today's episode with a look at Hampton men's basketball because they have fired their head coach who has been with the school for a decade and a half. Prior to that, Florida A&M in the first year under Coach Gordon, they have made it to the SWAC tournament for the first time since joining the conference. But we kick it off with a team that has started in the MEAC, been in that MEAC. We're looking at North Carolina Central. They ain't move over to the SWAC, but they have some fortuitous bounces go their way to make sure that they got the highest seed that they possibly could in the MEAC tournament. After being the fourth seed, going into the final game, this was Thursday, going into the final game of MEAC action, they were the fourth seed. Just a couple of hours later, they were the second seed. And I phrase it like that specifically. I could say after knocking off South Carolina State, they became the second seed. I could say that, but I prefer to say it in the sense that it felt like a sudden turn. In the matter of hours, North Carolina Central went from the fourth seed to the second seed in the MEAC tournament. And the funny thing about this is that this is what we always thought it would be. I always thought it was going to be Norfolk State, North Carolina Central. I came on here and I said it at some point throughout the season. You've heard somebody else say it if you talk about MEAC basketball. For a large period of the season, it felt like it was the Eagles and the Spartans, and they were the two teams destined to go at it for number one. We'll still see if that becomes the case in the tournament. In the regular season, not so much. But they still ended at 1-2. Let's go a little bit farther because you can't have this true conversation about the jump that North Carolina Central made by only speaking about the Eagles and speaking about Norfolk State. You also have to look at Howard. You also have to look at South Carolina State because all four of those teams are the ones who made it possible for this to be the situation we're walking into the tournament with. Norfolk State faced Howard, and North Carolina Central faced South Carolina State. Those are the four top teams in your conference. The four top teams faced each other in the last game of the season, so you knew it would be impactful. At worst, it would be high-level basketball. That's what you expected. Going in there, we could have easily had a three-way tie for the number one seed. I don't know who would have won in that. You could have had Norfolk State, Howard, South Carolina State, all tied for number one. And then North Carolina Central would have been secured at 4. They were already at 4, but they would have stayed there with no opportunity to be any higher. But that's not what happened. What ended up happening is the only situation that could have happened in order for North Carolina Central to be the 2 seed. Norfolk State knocked off Howard, and North Carolina Central knocked off South Carolina State. If anything else happened, you would have seen North Carolina Central at either 3 or 4. If Howard would have came victorious, we would be talking about, is it Howard or is it Norfolk State who's going to win that tiebreaker? If North Carolina Central would have lost, like I said, and Howard would have won, then you would have been looking at a three-way tie. There was so many things up at play when you look at that last game, not the last week, but that last game, that Thursday. For me, this feels right. For me, this feels like where we were always supposed to be. But I had my doubts because North Carolina Central went on a late season slide. They ended up winning a good amount of games in a row prior to losing to Morgan State in the second to last game. But you look at the 3-game losing streak that they had. They lost to Howard, they lost to Norfolk State, and then they also lost to Delaware State. No, it wasn't Delaware State. It was Morgan State. So they end up losing to those 3 schools. And I began to doubt if they were a top-level team. I began to question if, are we really looking at the 1 or the 2? Because it wasn't supposed to be Norfolk State is 1, North Carolina Central is 2. It was supposed to be these 2 teams are 1A, 1B. That confidence kind of disappeared when you went through that 3-game losing streak. And I'm sitting there like, Then you look at Howard, 4 wins in a row coming into the finale. You look at South Carolina State, 5 games in a row coming into the finale. It just didn't feel as if North Carolina Central was on that same trajectory as their peers, even though they had won, I think, 3 of the last 4. It just didn't feel like they were on that same trajectory. And it was mostly because they had that late game stumble or that late season stumble. So overall, I just wasn't high, but they ended up coming up with it. They won the 3-way tie. I don't know how, because for some reason the MEAC is doing a poor job, or did a poor job, not doing, but they did a poor job of publicizing the tiebreaker rules. I can assume that is based off of scoring margin against common opponents, because that's how South Carolina State was able to defeat Howard in their tiebreaker, because it was a 3-way tie. They said that Norfolk State won it. Then they told you how South Carolina State knocked off Howard. I just think it's poorly done. I want better publicity on it, but neither here nor there. You had some quality victories or some quality losses. You have some losses to quality teams. Quality loss is a disgusting phrase. That's a loser term. But you have some losses to quality teams that made me question if they were ready for the tournament. One game doesn't erase all of that, but them knocking off South Carolina State does give me a little bit more confidence for North Carolina Central going into the tournament. So if you would have asked me how this was all going to transpire, I would have told you that Norfolk State and North Carolina Central were going to be 1 and 2 in some sort of order. I just didn't think that we would get to it this way. Speaking of not thinking we would get to a destination with a particular route that we took to get there, I have FAMU, because for the first time since joining the SWAC, the Florida A&M women's basketball team has made the SWAC tournament, and they kind of overcame the odds to be able to knock off Bethune Cookman in the final game of the season. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. And are you one of those adventurers who like to push every single drive as far as you can? Are you one of those people who, I just finished with this adventure, but I want to look around the corner and see where the next adventure could be? If you are, go look at the line of Nissan's SUVs. You have the Armada, you have the Pathfinder, and you have the Rogue. We kick it off with the Rogue that is perfect for city drives. But then also, if you want to take it off-road, it's great for that. You're looking at a Rogue that has the Google Assist. So that means you don't have to update your phone. The car is going to do it for you. You go ahead and take advantage of that. It does Google Maps, Google Assistant, everything in between. But then you also have the Pathfinder, and the Pathfinder has room for up to 8 people, so it's a big one. And then you also get 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing. So whenever adventure calls, you can get into the Pathfinder, you can get into the Rogue, you can get into the Armada, you can get into whatever you want to. And to pick what you want, all you have to do is go to nissanusa.com to look at their lineup of SUVs. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. And for your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today, the first of its kind, 24/7 live sports network on YouTube. They waiting to jockey, so go ahead and go to Locked On Sports Today and subscribe. Florida A&M women's basketball has made the SWAC tournament for the first time. Now, I did see a little bit of confusion with people saying they made the conference tournament for the first time in school history. Since coming to this conference, FAMU had yet to make a SWAC tournament. We're not speaking their whole entire existence or anything of the sort. We're simply speaking about since they've joined the conference and what they've been able to do for the last 3 years. It has not been pretty. In the victory that they had to clinch their spot over Bethune Cookman, it clinched the 7th seed versus the 8th seed. I like to speak about, because I don't really know the time that these games are played a lot of times. They stagger them, but if I'm not mistaken, I think that this might have been the first women's basketball game of the finale. So when Bethune Cookman and FAMU were playing, there is no guarantee. Now, it ended up being because Prairie View lost to Texas Southern, and that was the last game. So if I'm not mistaken, I think the first game was the first game was FAMU versus Bethune Cookman, and the last game that started was Prairie View versus Texas Southern. So when FAMU and Bethune are playing, they don't have any ideology or any idea that Prairie View is going to lose. However, Prairie View's loss did guarantee that FAMU was going to make the tournament. But this was the difference between the 7th seed and the 8th seed. Because they won, they were able to get the 7th seed. Had they lost, they would have been in a tie for a 3-way tie. Bethune would have got the 7th seed, and FAMU would have had the 8th. Either way, they would have made it. But making it into the tournament on your own victory is significantly better than making it in backdoor with somebody else losing and that help you. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. But PV would have been the one looking out on the outside looking in. Regardless, FAMU is in a good spot. Whatever situation it was, PV losing the game, FAMU losing, FAMU winning, PV losing, didn't matter. Did not matter. FAMU is in a good place. And that sentence isn't really something that you could have said in a while, right? Like that's not something you could have honestly said in a while. FAMU is in a good place. I'm not trying to sit here and say it can't be better. Of course, you're the 7th seed. You can work your way up. Duh. But FAMU is in a good place, in a better place than they had been, because they weren't even making it into the tournament the last 3, 4, 5 years. Like, I'm talking about going into the MEAC. The headline, the tagline is FAMU made the SWAC tournament for the first time, because they joined the SWAC 3 years ago, and this is the first time they made that conference tournament. But when you look at beyond just the SWAC, prior to moving conferences, because the struggles with FAMU women's basketball run, I don't want to say deeper, but they're more long-lasting than their tenure in the SWAC. They haven't won 8 conference games until this year, since 2017. This is a women's basketball team that had been struggling for years. You're looking at the first 2 years that Florida A&M was in this conference, they won 4 games apiece in each season. This year, they won 8. And I think the big thing about it isn't just, oh, something clicked. The big story here is you brought in Bridget Gordon. So when you bring in Coach Gordon and you're looking at what she's been able to accomplish in year 1, you feel like, all right, we getting some progress. It's not just, boom, FAMU's one of the best. Because I think sometimes that's what people do. When they want to discredit, they don't understand that things have to start somewhere. I was talking to a friend of mine, right? And we were talking about this Cuban MMA fighter, Robelis Despain. And I made a comment, oh, he on the prelims. Brushed him off. But everybody has to start somewhere. And that was his UFC debut. The starting point does not deserve to be brushed away just because they haven't reached their pinnacle. Whatever their pinnacle could be. With Despain, he may be a prelim fighter. He may be a championship contender. With FAMU, they might be a 7-5 seed. They could be a number 1 seed. Like, these things all come into play, but let's not downplay the starting point simply because they have not reached a pinnacle. Nobody reaches a pinnacle off a rip. It just doesn't happen. No champion is born immediately. It's rare, right? Even you look at Patrick Mahomes. He didn't win a championship his first year. He might have been MVP. He had a very high starting point, but he didn't reach his pinnacle. That's how you have to look at these things. And they're reaching that start, or they're beginning that starting process under Coach Gordon. 4 wins, 8 wins. You doubled your season total from 2023, if you just want to look at it from the most recent season. But if you want to look at their entirety, you didn't double it, but you equaled out the amount of wins you've had in the SWAC since joining the conference, and you've done that in one season. That is extremely, extremely impressive, should not be downplayed. But the way they got here, because I told you, it's more than just them getting to the tournament. That's great. Doing it in year one, that's great. But the way that FAMU won this game over Bethune-Cookman to secure the 7th seed in the SWAC tournament, I think that might be the most impressive way. That might be the most impressive part. Winning your way into the tournament is great. Winning your way into the tournament is great. But the way, and knocking off your rival, that's even better. But the adversity, the odds that they had to overcome in order to win against their rival, in order to make it to the tournament, that's what makes this win special. Because you look at the fact that their 3 top scorers in the game all fouled out with a decent amount of time to play. You look at Olivia Delancey. She fouled out with 4 minutes left in the third quarter, down 13. Sydney Hendricks. She fouled out with 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Free throws led to that game being tied. Then Ariana Grizzle, arguably the SWAC player of the year, fouled out with 4 minutes left, and those free throws led to a tie game. When I break down the odds that FAMU had to overcome, when you look at these odds that they had to get past, when you look at the fact that honestly, FAMU versus Bethune-Cookman was an even matchup. FAMU versus Bethune-Cookman was an even matchup. But when you start losing players, that's when things get tricky. Delancey went out, 4 minutes left in the third quarter. You're down 13. You got to battle back. When Hendricks goes out with 8 minutes left in the fourth, free throws tie up that game. Now you're down to Ariana Grizzle. When you got Grizzle, a SWAC player of the year candidate, if not the winner, yes, you can handle her carrying the load. But when she goes out with 4 minutes left, and it's a tie game, it's not a situation where you just have to hold on. You have to go out and win it. You deliver. That's overcoming the odds. You do that against a rival in Bethune-Cookman. You do that with SWAC tournament seeding on the line. And in your mind, because you're the first game, your SWAC tournament berth is on the line. And you come up and you deliver. That's what I consider overcoming the odds. That's what I consider jumping over obstacles. That's me. And to me, that made this game, because it was impressive to win that way. It's even more impressive to win that way with everything that they had on the line. Now, as we push forward, let's look at Edward Joyner. Unfortunately, a long-time Hampton head coach is no longer going to be with the Pirates. They'll be looking for a new coach as they look to find more success in the CAA, and we'll look at that as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. If you're into basketball, there's a lot of money to be made. There is a lot of money to be made. The play-in's coming up. Are we going to be looking at the Warriors and the Lakers at 9 and 10? I don't think so, but you got the Pelicans on the rise. My guy's been winning. You got the Timberwolves. You got the Clippers. You got the Thunder. You have on the East, you have the Bucks, the Heat. Like all of these, matter of fact, oh no, we're still about a week away from that. But you have great games coming up on a consistent basis that you can put your money in. Live betting, same game parlays, everything you could possibly want is all on FanDuel.com/lockedon. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. And if you're new to FanDuel, put down a $5 bet and win, and you'll get $150 back in bonus bets. All you have to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That is FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get $150 back in bonus bets if you're new to FanDuel. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day, making it all the way to segment 3. And I thank you 2 times for that. Thank you. Thank you. Edward Joyner is gone. Edward Joyner has been the head coach of Hampton for the last 15 years. And when people say the end of an era, this is what they mean. And it's not just like you don't get to 15 years without being successful. That's the difficult part about having this conversation because it's redundant sometimes. You don't get to 15 years without being a really good coach. You don't get to 15 years without winning a lot. But he took winning a lot to another level. Is adversity the proper way to say that? I do believe that moving conferences can be an adverse situation. Don't know if I necessarily consider it an obstacle all the time, but it is tough to navigate. And when you look at Edward Joyner, Coach Joyner was the pillar of stability in an extremely unstable situation multiple times. 15 years. 15 years. And in the last 5, they've been in 3 different conferences. And he survived in every single one. And he's brought great success to at least 2 of those 3. 7 trips to the postseason in his 15-year career. I'm not going to sit here and call them a powerhouse, but doggone it, Hampton was one of the best HBCUs playing ball. 3 trips. 3 trips to the NCAA tournament. And when you look at when he went to the Big South, he was successful there too. He was successful in the Big South. Hampton had good product. I think the fact that he coached in the MEAC, the fact that he coached in the Big South, he coached in the CAA, all with different teams, is a kudos to his ability. Because I look at North Carolina Central. In North Carolina Central, they switched up quick. In football, they said, we're going to get rid of a successful coach as we go to the CAA because we want to start anew. In basketball, they've gone through 3 coaches. Now, you did have Will Jones, who was able to make that transition from late MEAC. He came in 2019, late MEAC. He made it to the Big South. But then by the time it was time to go to the CAA, interim head coach, new head coach. They've had multiple coaches since because they've done the same trajectory. MEAC, Big South, CAA. They've done that same boing, 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 boing. Like they've done that. But you look at Hampton, a pillar of stability, and he's won tournament games in every single conference. Obviously, he won a lot in the MEAC. He was going to NCAA tournaments. He's won multiple games in the Big South in a same championship or in the same tournament. He's won multiple games. You're looking at a guy who just in general has made it to the postseason, whether that's the NCAA, the NIT, the CBI, the CIT. He's made it there in the Big South and the MEAC. We have to credit that because a lot of times people are treated as if, once they leave that HBCU conference, it ain't gonna be so pleasant for him. But he was able to succeed outside of that. He just didn't succeed in the CAA. And the problem is, recently, he hasn't succeeded. He's the winningest coach since Hampton's moved up to the D1 level. Extremely successful. Like, you can't take that from him. But he hasn't won recently. This is the statement from the AD. Edward Joyner Jr. has been a pillar. I didn't even realize they said pillar like I have. But Edward Joyner Jr. has been a pillar of commitment and leadership for our basketball program. However, the recent lack of sustained success has led us to pursue a new direction for our team. It's been 3 years and they haven't been good. That's what happened. And I don't know if they were itching to find a new coach for the CAA, but I do believe that they will find a coach who is a little bit more familiar with this conference. I do believe that is what you will see next. So we'll be on the lookout. We'll talk about that whenever it happens. But this is a Feature Friday type of topic. And if he hadn't got fired, if he had just stepped down, if he had retired, then this probably would have been a Feature Friday. But unfortunately, the circumstances say, let's go ahead and look at this on a Tuesday. So I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Tomorrow, we have tournament previews. Matter of fact, tomorrow we'll actually have tournament action, but I'll preview it in the morning. So make sure you get to Wednesday's episode as fast as possible because we're going to get that out early and start covering our games that we want to watch prior to them happening. In the meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until the next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.